My name is Cornelis, and I'm the co-host of this bright day. Marlies, Hesselman, and Audrey Dobbins also set up this discussion, and today we will be talking about right to free energy. How it happened in practice. Yesterday we had a very nice and interactive chat. Marlies will tell us about it in a minute. So let's go. Let's get the party started. Marlies, if you wrap up a little bit what was said yesterday, and then I will introduce Audrey, who will make a presentation.
Yeah, great. So for those who were there yesterday, we had a very lively discussion on the first day of the conference where we were dealing with the question about what is energy and what is it for, where there were very different answers from people with very different backgrounds in the energy field. But it also quickly turned out that actually a big part of the discussion went into the direction of but what is the right to energy, if you would want to define it? Could it be something that is universal? Is it about minimum energy access, for example? How to make it affordable? Should it be free? Those are questions that sort of arose out of that idea of whether or not we can really make energy something that is should be available for everybody and that everybody has an entitlement to. So the question is, how does this work? We have a very nice graphic recording of this day, which I hope that the tech team will be able to bring up and to show. But otherwise, I really recommend to have a look at the final wrap-up of the day, also on the Engager website, because every day we'll have actually a graphic recording summing up the entire day. This is done by Louisa. She is also with us today. So you will, at one point during this meeting, start seeing this graphic recording happening. And I think we can now all see also the one from yesterday. It's very complex. We had very interesting discussions. And I think it was very clear that throughout the Engager conference, every day we will pick up a number of these themes that emerged. And for today, that is really this question of can we have a right to minimum energy that is affordable, or maybe that's even free. This was the drawing of yesterday, and you will be seeing as we go along a live drawing happening of the talks that we are having today. So I think the screen of Louisa will come into view now and again to give us an update of what we have been discussing and to see a common story maybe emerging there. So that was sort of about yesterday. For today, we have also a plan. An outline. I'm not sure if this is something that Maureen wanted to introduce.
Yeah, absolutely. So we will have Audrey talking about her research during about 10 minutes. Then we will have a panel discussion involving Houtman, Joana, Mundó, and Ruth London. And then we will break out in different sessions. And Marlies will be in charge of this. And now she will explain to you exactly what is awaiting you.
Yeah, great. So we have indeed the question, the presentation of Audrey coming up in a minute. And the idea is that Audrey will give an introductory presentation to the idea of what are minimum energy services, or how you could define it, and then also how to make this affordable. But we actually wanted to, and then the presentations that will be done later by the panel and the panel discussion will be on the same question. But we actually wanted to sort of spark your interest, or maybe get your ideas going on this yourselves as well, or to maybe see where we stand at the beginning of this session by having a poll. And the poll will go via Mentimeter, and I will share the link in the public chat. So if you click on the link in the public chat, you will be taken to a poll. And the poll will ask you to think about what you think are necessary energy services in your national context, or maybe you can even think about your personal context. Because one of the questions that arose yesterday, and that we are all also familiar with in our own work, is if you want to talk about the minimum right to energy or some type of right to energy, should we have to define somehow what is common to all of us? And is that possible? So we would love for you to open up the Mentimeter and to have a look at the poll and to vote. You can click for any type of service that you want. And I will show the results to you on the screen, so we can see what it is that we all thought. And then after that, we go to Audrey's presentation, where she will explain to us in more detail, in quite a lot of detail actually, how we could think about these defining such services in more detail, but then also maybe coming up with policies to actually try to make that happen, because that's the basic idea of today, how to define something that is minimum, and then maybe also how to make it happen in practice. And the first part of the session will be about Audrey's presentation and the panel discussion. And then after 5, in the second part, we will also really have an interactive session where we will work with the Miro board and do some breakout groups and brainstorming. But we will come back to you and explain how that exactly works at the end of the first session. So I hope that you've all been able to open up the Mentimeter. What I will do is I will also share the results slide, so you can hopefully see what comes up there.
Absolutely, and non-registered participants can also join the Mentimeter. It's embedded in the schedule under day 2, so don't worry. You can all see this poll. And now, Marlies, if you want to share the screen before or after Audrey's presentation.
Yeah.
Do you have enough result now?
Trying to find the tab, which of course is not always working as you would want to, but here are the results. So it's very interesting to see what comes up there, right? Because you can now see all these bars moving up in terms of what people are voting for that they think are really essential services. And it's interesting that we see a number of different things. Internet seems to be one of the top services that people apparently think that are necessary household services. But besides that, we see other ICTs. We see computer, laptop, mobile phone. The washing machine is rising, and also the refrigerator as sort of an essential appliance for, I guess, cooling in the home. Whether that's maybe for food or for medicines, could be different things. Then I was personally very curious to see how the tumble dryer would do, or how the hair dryer would do, and if it would get any votes. But they also got votes, and I think that is quite interesting to see, because one of the resources that we shared in the library of the conference is an article by Walker, Simcock and Day, who have sort of tried to identify in the UK context what could be minimum services, also through participatory methods. And actually, the tumble dryer and the hair dryer were both things that came out of their results. Maybe not for everybody, but at least for some people. For example, the tumble dryer for families with many small children. So I'm very interested to see that it's also being pointed out here. I guess the question for today is, and hopefully Audrey will also continue on this, is if we are able to define this basket of services or appliances that we think would be essential, how would you then actually try to make sure that people could get access to them?
This is a perfect transition towards Audrey's presentation, I suppose.
Yes.
So if you allow me, it will be my pleasure to introduce Audrey Dobbins, that you must already all know, is a researcher at the Institute of Energy Economics and Rational Energy Use at the University of Stuttgart in Germany. She researches on energy poverty issues in the South African, European and German context. Audrey, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction and for the recap of yesterday, ladies. Yesterday we talked about what energy is and why it is important. And today we want to open up the discussion about what we need to consider when looking at defining what minimum energy might be, particularly in terms of trying to quantify these and implement some kind of support. So, starting from the global context, an attempt is made to define minimum energy under the global tracking framework, which you may have also seen in the references section for this session today. So here, certain essential services are outlined which correspond to tiered phases of access to energy. And these are quantified in terms of installed capacities required to provide these services. So it means that increased consumption is defined as the benchmark for increasingly being able to meet household service demands. And this is verified when you look at the graph on the right, where you can see that the higher the average income of a country, so is the higher the energy consumption per capita. And this gives credence to the fact that household appliances are required to meet service demands. and that these are typically powered through electricity and other fuels. As Marlies already recapped so nicely, the paper by Walker also took a different approach to using participatory methods to try and identify what essential services are for the UK. And this looked at defining them for different household compositions. And this is also something that can give us an insight into what essential services are on a national, or it can also be a more local level, as minimum essentials services, so that households can also participate in society. And through this process, they're also reviewed every 2 years, and that allows the minimum services to be redefined and adjusted as needed. But the difficult task for governments is then to translate these essential needs into a monetary value in order to be able to distribute these via subsidy. So we conducted a review in 2016 for the European Commission, where we looked at the energy-related financial transfers provided across Europe. So governments tackled defining which minimum amount would be sufficient for households to meet their needs. And the beneficiaries of this support in this study are mainly those defined for vulnerable consumers within the context of the liberalized energy markets. And what this means is that there's a wide range of subsidy types that are provided, but obviously there's no single way to implement these subsidies. So each member state does provide some sort of service. So some of them are aimed at providing only heating support, while others are aimed at targeting support only for electricity or only for gas. But the majority of and these are largely provided through a lump sum. And in this way, governments effectively remove themselves from the debate about what is a minimum energy service by putting the burden back onto the consumer to decide which needs are most important. So it is then up to the households to decide if they want to spend the money on energy or for some other purpose. So here we can see on the left-hand side the average energy consumption per household in some selected member states. And these vary not only by magnitude, but also by the types of fuel used. So as shown before with the subsidies, you can see that the different fuels have different relevance for different member states. So the average consumption for each member state is dependent not only on the technical efficiencies of the building and the household appliances, as well as the environmental factors such as the heating and cooling degree days, but also on the socioeconomic drivers of demand, such as household sizes, the compositions, living standards, energy prices, etc. And the graph on the right compares the financial support from the previous slide with the average expenditure on energy per household for these selected member states. So I excluded the member states that provide only a lump sum payment, because from this we can't see how much is actually spent on energy. And what we can see here is that the yellow bar shows the amount that is provided through the financial support, and the brown bar shows what the average household expenditure on energy is. And here, the member states that are on the left of the dashed line receive less financial compensation than the average household spends on energy, while the member states on the right of the dashed line receive more financial support than the average household spends. So in terms of providing minimum energy, this is where the targeting of the subsidies becomes important, so as to ensure that those who actually need support get it, and that the amount received is diluted, is sufficient and not diluted through ill distribution methods. Also, what is the good of defining a minimum if it is not achieved in the implementation, nor related to the national context? So at this point, we also have to take a step back and reflect on what we need and where we want to go on the household, as well as the national and the global levels. So starting with households, we need to think about what it is that households actually need or want. And what they want is a comfortable ambience. They want warm meals, clean clothes, etc., at affordable cost, but also without compromising convenience. And this was shown also in the Walker study. And the typical approach is to think about the specific services or appliances, such as the heaters, the stoves, the refrigerators, etc., that are needed, and how much energy is then required to operate these in order to meet the needs, defined in the left-hand column. And this kind of approach is reflected in that in the global tracking framework. But at the same time, on the national and global levels, we also need to think about what we need and want. And this comes back to the decarbonization objectives for the mid-century, where households also have a significant role to play. So as the pressure to decarbonize ramps up the costs of consuming grid fuels, there's an increasing shift towards, firstly, eliminating demand through conservation. And this is where behavioral change, lifestyle, and standards comes into play. Secondly, investment into energy efficient buildings and appliances, as well as net zero type buildings, which employ no energy services like thermal insulation and skylighting. Thirdly, increasing the shares of renewable, decentralized and self-generation, and only then supplementing additional demand through grid and fossil fuels. So as was highlighted yesterday, and I iterate again today, that it is crucial to acknowledge that ever more services can be provided without an energy input component, but that this will require investments. So to illustrate this point, we just want to take a look at an example of an average household in Germany today. So this household consumes 56 gigajoules annually, and the majority of the demands go towards space and water heating, and these are largely met with fossil fuels. Again, looking at the 2050 decarbonization targets, households should be aiming towards an ideal type of situation where demands are reduced through conservation, energy efficient appliances, net zero type housing, self-generation, etc., in order to be largely decarbonized, as you can see on the top building. That's the ideal situation. But at the same time, households maybe have unmet needs, which are typically measured as under-consuming. And we have to think about their energy future as well. So without renewable and energy efficiency investments, their energy consumption pathway is locked into a pattern of meeting needs with increased energy consumption, coupled with increasing costs, either directly to the household or to the funding agency. So in this example, the minimum energy needed to provide essentially the same services now ranges from something like 11 to 56 gigajoules per household, crudely put. So we have the opportunity within the Right to Energy framework to reframe how to look at what we are financing in order to provide essential household services to all. So some households have and will continue to have a need for financial support to help pay for energy bills and avoid disconnections in the short term. And so there's a need to increase the financial capacity of households for bill payments. But equally critical is the long-term financial support to address the structural changes required and to help households overcome these high upfront costs of investment for buildings and appliances. And this will lead to lower demands, therefore lower long-term energy consumption costs. So the opportunity here is to recognize that we should not fall into a trap of simply maintaining the status quo where energy bills are paid and the obligation to supply the minimum services is provided. The energy transition demands investments, and it is at this point where it is key that governments and related stakeholders need to recognize that addressing energy poverty and achieving the climate targets are not competing objectives. So to sum up, there are several considerations or questions raised. So we want to try and understand, where are we today and where do we want to be? How do we best define essential household needs and for whom? Who pays for what and how to pay? And who takes which role in the implementation? These are some of the key questions that I hope that we can grapple with this afternoon. And I'm sorry for coming up with more questions than answers, but I look forward to the discussion and the practicalities of implementing this. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Audrey. Really, you said it well. Discussing the right to energy is about challenging the status quo, because the energy needs differ. The energy needs are here to stay, and we need to have the best policy response to that. So that's why we have now some very distinguished speakers who see the right to energy in practice. And I really would like them to react on your presentation and share with us their insights, because they may have been involved in energy program or energy free energy program, or maybe they are thinking about it. They are acting at different levels and in different EU countries. And to start our presentation, I would like Eric Houtman, who is the Belgian Energy Ombudsman. He's Dutch-speaking, but I assume that there is still no French-speaking ombudsman. So he's been the Ombudsman for Energy since 2009. And Eric has very nice insights to share with us on the free electricity scheme that existed in Flanders. It existed during 15 years, from 2000 to 2015. And I really would like Eric to tell us what did not work in the Flanders free energy program and why was it stopped. We will see if our discussion will manage to overcome this challenge. Thank you, Eric. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Marlene. Thank you for the nice introduction also. And everybody, welcome. And I like to give you a small presentation on the free electricity in Flanders, like it existed in the years 2000 till the years 2015. So I'm the Federal Energy Ombudsman, and my legal mission is to deal with individual complaints and disputes between end consumers and SMEs and energy companies and DSOs on the other hand. And I also try to find structural solutions for some issues, and I can do that by formulating recommendations towards companies and energy companies, suppliers and DSOs, and also by formulating political advice towards the Federal Minister of Energy and the Parliament. But as an ombudsman, I was also confronted with some problems related to the free electricity in France, but not much. I looked a few years back, and I saw that from 2010, because the Ombudsman service is active still till from 2010, we received 90 complaints about this free electricity. But let's first try to explain it. For instance, I'm the Federal Energy Ombudsman, that I like to say also. And Belgium is a very complex land, not only in a political way, but also in an institutional way. And so it is only free electricity that was provided in Flanders and not in the Brussels region, neither in the Walloon region. Next slide, please. So there were two conditions. You need to be a household customer, and it was only for the main address where the household was living. Next slide, please. So you could receive 100 kilowatt hour free electricity per family, and it was increased by 100 kilowatt hours for each family member who has his main residence on the 1st of January in the year in question. And the free electricity was based on prices fixed every year by the Flemish energy regulator, the VREC. These were the prices in 2013, 2014, and 2015. As you can see, it was 19 euro cent kilowatt hours in 2015, but I will explain it in an example. Next slide, please. So, when you and your partner have 2 children, you received a discount of 500 kilowatt hours of free electricity, or an amount of 95 euros. So you received 100 kilowatt hour because you were a family, and then 100 because you were the father, 100 kilowatt hour for the mother, 100 kilowatt hour for one child, 100 kilowatt hour for the second child, and you received 500 kilowatt hours of free electricity at the price of 19 euro cent kilowatt hour. So that was the amount of 95 euros in 2015. If you are living alone, you received free electricity for 200 kilowatt hours. And if you are living with the partner and without children, you are receiving 300 kilowatt hour. Next slide, please. Then the system. You received this free kilowatt hour on the bill. On the bill from the supplier where you were, who was responsible for the supply on the 1st of April, and on the bill in the invoice you received after the 1st of May. If you were your yearly invoice was in the months January until April, you needed to wait for the invoice of the next year. This was the system that was created in order to give this free electricity through the bill, the yearly bill. Yeah. And then the main question, of course, how it was financed. And it was financed via the tariffs of the DSO, the distribution system operator, by the public service obligations. So it was a social public service obligation that was imposed to the DSO. And every end user of electricity was paying for this free electricity. Also, the households without children, but they were receiving at least 100 kilowatt hour for the household and 100 kilowatt hour, at least 200 kilowatt hours for the family and one person. But also professional end users using the distribution network need to pay for the system. And I think this is also the reason why it doesn't exist anymore, because I made an estimation. So in Flanders there were 2.8 million households actually, and if they were receiving an average of 60 euros free electricity, you had you need a budget of 186 million euros that need to be redistributed over 35 million megawatt hours yearly consumption of electricity, and 4.8 euro per megawatt hour was needed to be paid in order to fund this compensation system. So a household that received free electricity of 60 euros had to pay 60.8 euros. So it was not really, it was free, but it needed to be paid also. But of course, the industry and the professional end users who were not receiving this free electricity because they weren't a household needed to pay the most of this bill, and an average of 75% of the annual consumption is consumed by the industry and the end users. And you can imagine that there was a lot of pressure to the government in order to stop this system of free electricity, because industry and professional end users were not happy to pay for this free electricity that was only in favor of households, and especially of households with children. And I think this was my last explanation. I want to add also that in Belgium you had also other systems in order to try to make affordable, especially the electricity price, but also the gas price. You have the system of social tariffs for certain groups of people. And we also had a system of lower VAT of 6% in the period between the 1st of April 2014 till the 1st September, till the end of August, the 31st of August 2050. For a year and a half, there was also reduced VAT on electricity, VAT of 6%. But it's also abolished in the meantime. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric. If you participants have questions, they can put them in the chat. That's really important to start with the actually examples of things that didn't work. The idea still seems good, but in fact, maybe the policy scheme was not that efficient, or there were things that didn't work along the way, and that's really important to learn from this kind of past experience in order to build policies that are future-proof and that can benefit people in the long term. So Joana is now going to tell us about the situation in Catalonia. And Joana Mundó is working for Ecoserveis, which is a non-profit organization focused on developing innovative solutions to respond to emerging energy challenges. And actually, they are pioneers in Spain and maybe in Europe in the fight for energy rights. Joana, question for you: how is the right to basic energy movement going forward? Please, the floor is yours.
Hi, good afternoon to everybody. So I can explain what's been the process here for the last years and where we are now, and what we can think about the future. You can go to the next slide, please, or the other. The next slide, please. Yeah. So, yeah. When we talk about energy poverty in Spain, we have to think that 10 years ago, or more or less 10 years ago, energy poverty was not even acknowledged as a social problem here, because we have this mindset that we are in a Mediterranean country where there's sun, where there's mild climate, so we don't have this problem. So until some studies really exposed that actually there was a problem and there was a huge amount of energy poverty in our country, it was not even discussed in the public sphere. But then about 2010, 2011, it started to be debated in the public agenda. It was quite an issue that it was integrated in the policy debates. And the first governmental talks started in order to see how they could deal with that. So they set up working groups with several civil society organizations in order to, on the one hand, define what's energy poverty, and then also to set up or to define which would be these minimum energy services in order to define what should be provided to vulnerable households. And here it somehow didn't go that well, because when trying to define the minimum services to be provided for vulnerable households, we saw that there were a lot of complexities. So, for example, even here, that it's not a big region. I mean, it's 7 million inhabitants in Catalonia. We have 4 different climates, so it's very different to provide a service like heating in the Pyrenees, in a single house in the Pyrenees, than in a flat in a multifamily building in Barcelona, for example. So even if we start defining the minimum energy services, or what do you think are the essential services, when you translate it into kilowatt hours or into economic subsidies, it can vary a lot across the territory. So that was the first thing that came into play when there were these discussions. But also there are other things. For example, the household standards where the people live in. So it's not the same to provide a service in a household that has good insulation than another one that it hasn't a good insulation. And finally, there's these human factors. So how many people lives there? What are the socioeconomical profiles of these people? If they have a health condition that really makes them to need the electricity as for keeping their life. So the discussions were blocked because it was very difficult to reach an agreement, and it stayed that way. But in the meanwhile, several grassroots movements also were organized, and they managed to pass a law through an instrument which is called Popular Legislative Initiative, where if citizenship draft a law and they manage to gather a certain number of signatures, the parliament is compelled to at least discuss this law. And in that case, they set up a law on affordable housing and also on energy poverty. These grassroots movements made it to get all the signatures, and the law was approved by the Catalan parliament in 2015. Several articles were cancelled because they were not competence of the regional government, but there was an interesting thing that it's still working now, and it's that this law has introduced the precautionary principle in the protocols of cutting the energy supply of vulnerable households. So before that moment, if someone stopped paying their bills, the energy supplier could simply cut their energy supply without asking for anything. And it was the work of the family to demonstrate that they were vulnerable, that they needed some solution, etc. Since 2015 and since this law passed, and with the precautionary principle in place, it is about the energy supplier to demonstrate that a household is not vulnerable. So the first assumption is that we can all be vulnerable, and it's a way to ensuring the access to these energy services at least. But the thing is that so now the scenario we have now is that we don't have the energy supply cut for vulnerable households, or at least it shouldn't be cut because there's a law protecting from that. But as Eric said, and also Audrey said, energy is not free, so it has a cost to produce it. It has a cost to bring it to people's homes. So now the dilemma we are facing now is who has to pay for this, because the energy is not cut, but some families are accumulating debts because neither the municipalities or the energy supply companies are paying for this debt. And it brings me to the next slide. And so the central points of the discussion today. So the first thing that we have to think about when thinking about free energy or affordable energy is, okay, if energy is not free for the supply of energy is not free, of course, we have to define very well and debate who has to pay for that. So Does it has to be the public services? Does it has to be energy companies that are making profits out of a basic services? Do it has to be a mix of both? I don't know. Maybe it should be a mix of both, but at least it has to be very well defined in order to avoid this kind of like legal insecurity in our case. Then another point that has to be taken into consideration is that to define these ranges considered as basic have very different implications and very complex realities regarding climate, household standards, and also socioeconomic profiles. So it's not like defining the basic nutrition standards where you can say a person needs 2,000 calories a day and that's it. So you have to take into consideration several external factors which can change. And also there's also a subjective thing from every household. So this is very complex, and it's very complex to translate it into laws and into real guarantees for these basic energy ranges. And finally, when we think about affordable energy, it's not all about who's paying for these energy services, but also for setting up a set of market rules that ensure that the costs, that the prices for energy reflect the costs that it takes to produce it. So there are no over margins or things that are not necessary. Also, that the taxes are not abusive. I mean, in Spain, the taxes for energy services is 21%, which is higher VAT for commodities in our country. So if we acknowledge that energy is a right or is a basic service, we should also decrease the taxes and reflect it on the tax system. And also, well, we shouldn't forget that promoting renewable energies can also bring the prices down. So promoting a model that is based on renewable energies can also be a way to ensuring affordable energy for all. And I think that's it from my side. So something learned, from the process is that it's not only about politicians or the public services to define that. And that's been the case in Catalonia, where the civil society has had a central role in fighting for these rights and in actually achieving access rights to this basic service, which is energy. So our conclusion would be that we should also be a very active agent in the fight for the energy as a right, as society, as organized society. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Joana. I think it's a perfect transition towards Ruth's presentation, because Ruth is also leading a civil society coalition of people who are actually fighting for against fuel poverty. So Ruth is based in the UK. And Ruth, can you tell me what is currently missing from the minimum free energy to be implemented? Little parenthesis, our fantastic Louisa has been drawing everything that you guys have been saying so far. So don't forget to just watch the screen, because she's doing some magic now. Ruth, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I think we were invited because we've been for some years putting forward a proposal calling for what we call Energy for All, which is a free band of energy to cover basic needs, which would be paid for at least in part by increasing the tariff for energy that's used over that amount. And we came back to this proposal with COVID, really, because there was a lot of pressure to end people being disconnected. And the trouble with the proposals which we fought for were that they all ended up with people just having their debts postponed, so that there was this accumulating debt that you were going to pay for someday whenever all of this was over, right? Which people can't do. And the monies were insufficient, and it's very ad hoc, and it doesn't really deal with anything fundamentally. And we said we needed something more systemic. We don't have experience of it working out in practice. It's really, really useful to hear from Eric. And I know there's been work done on it in Wallonia as well. So, Belgium leads the way. But we have some relevant experience, I think, with heat networks, with district heating schemes where people actually don't pay for how much they use. They pay a flat rate, and it's sometimes subsidized, sometimes in the rent, and that can provide some useful lessons, which maybe we can go into in the discussion. But in the short time I have, I just want really to report on some feedback that we've had on the proposal, not from political parties and Green New Deal and so on, that's easy, but feedback that we've had on a grassroots level. Because we're a grassroots organization, and most of our work is organizing with tenants and residents about their heating systems and their housing. And we also work a lot with pensioners on fuel poverty issues. And we held a series of Zoom meetings with the people that we work with on those issues. Some of them are active members of Fuel Poverty Action, to see what they thought about this idea of energy for all. And generally, people were very keen, particularly pensioners. And that's not accidental, because people really want the security of a basic free level of energy, because so many of them are dying from cold every winter, thousands and thousands. People, pensioners and otherwise, were also very keen on reversing the present situation, which is perverse, which is that you pay more per unit if you use less. So if you try to cut down on your usage because of the standing charge, you're actually paying more per unit. Energy for All would stand that on its head because of the free band. And people are very keen on that. And people also wanted rich people to pay more for their energy as a deterrent to wasting it. And that was an important part of the package for the people on our Zoom calls. Some of the specifications that came out of those meetings were, A, no means test. And pensioners in particular remembered the concept of universal rights rather than charity. And although a lot of the fuel poverty lobby has been working for more what they call targeting, which is actually more means testing, because that can get more benefit to the people at the bottom because you're spending less on people at the top. People wanted something that was universal, not stigmatizing, and socially cohesive. We can go into that more. A big issue, obviously, is that if prices go up for people who are using a higher level of heat, what about people who need a lot because of their age, their family size, their health, or the condition of their housing? And for that, what some of the people on housing estates proposed was that people should be allocated more energy from renewables, like, solar panels on the roofs of all the buildings on the estate, and that energy should go to the people who actually have higher needs. And a principal part of the scheme then was that it would integrate renewables into the Energy for All system. And it would also have to integrate state-funded energy efficiency work on people's houses, so that it isn't the case that some people really need a lot more than the basic amount because they're heating the street. So it also looks like the whole thing would require a state subsidy, because although the extra paid by people who use a lot of energy would contribute a good deal of money, it's unlikely to be enough to cover the basic needs of people who are not using extra. And it's not clear how that would happen with a system where energy is provided by private corporations. So state subsidy might also mean state control and state ownership. And I'd be interested in, what other people are thinking about on that. So there's a lot of issues to discuss, about universality and means testing, about state subsidies and private ownership, about tailoring the free amount to people's different needs, whether you can have an audit on what's required for different households, whether it's too complicated to make that the basis of your allocation. These are all things that we can get into, but I won't take more time now. I want to really learn from the people here. We've learned a great deal from Ruada in Wallonia, from Aurélie, who I think is on this this call, who had the same proposal there. And we're very strengthened by the fact that it's something that's been picked up, taken up in Europe as well as by ourselves in the UK.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Ruth. Thank you so much for our three speakers. You've all been amazing, and I see that there's a lot of questions that have been asked in the chat. You have been also fantastic responding to them, but something that struck me throughout all your presentation is how you all mentioned the question of how energy is actually produced, because with clean energy, like from renewable sources, maybe it becomes kind of easier to provide free energy for all. And another point is that several of you mentioned the importance of COVID and addressing COVID as one of the leading factors in you thinking again or thinking in general about providing free energy. And regarding this, the COVID, Marlies and several other colleagues from Engager have set up a wonderful map where you can find a lot of super useful information of different support schemes. With the third wave that is hitting Europe now, I would be really curious to see how it evolves. But overall, this question is really for all of you. But what is currently missing? What is for policymakers or even for the society to take the leap? Is it something? Is it because big companies don't want to see this kind of free experiment happen, or does it go beyond that? To any of you? Yeah, Eric, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Maureen, I think you remember also the discussions we had a few years ago when Europe was looking for the definition of energy poverty. And it was very difficult to find a common definition on energy poverty. And why? Because every member state has its own approach. The more Scandinavian, Nordic countries were saying we don't need a separate system that intervene in the energy market, because we have our own social security system that is strong enough to cover up the problems with high energy prices, the problems for supply disconnection and so on. And then you have other countries, more the Latin countries in Europe, who are saying, no, energy is a basic right, and you need to protect people also via the public service obligations. We call it like that, the public service obligations imposed to suppliers and DSOs. And I think in Belgium we have a mixed. We have the public service obligations imposed to DSOs in regarding to avoid disconnection and so on. You cannot be, if you have no contact anymore with your supplier, you've been dropped to the DSO, and the DSO is the social supplier and so on. And you have also a public service obligation imposed to suppliers, because they need to make you a payment plan if you cannot pay they don't need to, but they need to offer you at least a payment plan if you cannot pay your energy bill. And then on the other hand, we have a social security system, and especially during the during the pandemic crisis, it was very useful, because people, if they cannot pay their bill, they can go to the local social welfare agency, and these local social welfare agencies have been funded also with 110 million euros extra also last year. And the government, the federal government, because we have 3 regional governments and 1 federal government, has also extended the right to the social tariffs from February this year till December this year for people who has income less than 20,000 euros a year. So we have a mixed system by imposing public service obligations to DSOs and suppliers in order to make affordable the energy bills, and in order to protect consumers when they cannot pay their energy bill. And on the other hand, you have the social security system also that still exists if when people have problems by paying their energy bill. Thank you.
Ruth, you seem to have something to say?
Yeah, I think the first thing that's missing is the political will. I mean, what we need in this country, fuel poverty action, we're unfunded and we don't have resources to crunch the numbers, and there's a lot of research needed on what how something like this could actually work, something like Energy for All, free band, how that could work, how it would be allocated. Is it by person, by household, or by individual? Should it take account of health needs? All sorts of questions like that. But the will is the issue. And, certainly in the UK, there's a kleptocracy in charge. But we don't know what will happen, because the level of poverty is so great now, with malnutrition, children in hospital with malnutrition, children without shoes, people without sanitary protection, stuff that we haven't seen since, for a very long time. And we don't really know if there will be such a backlash against people being cut off and left in the cold that something systematic might be possible. But I think with the I was a bit disturbed to see it characterized that what Eric said about the system having been brought to an end is characterized as there's something wrong with it. But it doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong with it. It could just mean that this was an attempt to redistribute, and the people who had lost in the redistribution of wealth became strong enough to stop it happening. And, when that happens, like when you get a pushback on minimum wages or whatever, the only way is to fight back, not to say the minimum wage was wrong to begin with. And similarly, we see the same issues about industry with something like a carbon tax and the dividend, that everybody pays the higher price, but industry doesn't get the dividend. So industry doesn't like it. And that's not necessarily a failing of the system. Thanks.
Audrey, I see you are nodding. What do you have to say about this? Did you analyze some trend going in this direction?
Yeah, I mean, I would just like to agree with Ruth on that the government's willingness to take action is one of the key points, because one of the problems is that the structural changes that we need reside in the private domain, but the funding from government comes from the public sector. So there has to be a balance between government supporting the uptake of the proper financial framework, so that the right kinds of financing mechanisms can reach the households that also need them. And that's where we also need to get alternative financing mechanisms on board, because I mean, that's really what the ultimate question is how are we going to pay for the massive investments that we need to make? So, I mean, also like on a project scale, there's been a lot of things that have been happening. So looking at circular funding or local area-based improvements, or even the appliance rental schemes like the Papillon project. So it looks at trying to address the issues in like a smaller scale. But what we need is not piecemeal projects. We need this to be taken up on a grand scale, and that's where governments need to step in and say, okay, we're doing this now.
So, Joana, you must have thought it quite through with the Right to Energy Coalition in Spain. So, how do you overcome this kind of political unwillingness or shortcomings in fundings? Because I feel that if there's a will, there's a way, but if there is no will, well, there must be a wall. So, how do you destroy that wall?
Well, there are a lot of walls and it's not easy. So it's about, being able to put the debate in the political agenda so that the different politicians appropriate the main topics and they start discussing it. At least in the case or in the experience from the last years, that was the case. So a lot of people started to talk about this, so they had to integrate it in their policy debates and in their policy programs, and that's how this was approved. But it's not easy, and it goes sometimes on creating specific trends on the public discussions. But in any case, what I think that we are missing many times here is an integrated approach. So to go beyond only the social services or the welfare system and the financial instruments to subsidize for vulnerable households, but also to integrate market rules that are not fully transparent or that are easy to manipulate, and then also to tackle the legal pillar, so ensuring this energy as a right in the legal system of the countries, and then a third pillar, which would be this a strong social fabric that monitorizes and that watches how all this is being implemented, because without having this integrated approach, the problem can continue growing. So we have to tackle to the roots of the problem.
Indeed, we have to address the roots of the problem and see things not in their little silos, because we all know that energy is only one of the struggles that many families have in their lives. So, Marlies, now the floor is yours. I leave you up to the questions, or the floor is yours.
Thanks. Yeah, and actually it's not mine, it's for the participants, because we have had a very interesting discussion in the chat going on while these great presentations were given. Lots of discussion, lots of different comments and views, not so many questions. So actually, if I see it correctly, there's only one question that was being asked by two participants, and it's directed at Eric, and it's related a bit to the discussion that we were just having. So could you explain maybe in your own impression, what was back then the main reason behind the idea of launching a free electricity campaign? What was the main driver for that? And was it a demand from citizens or a politician's idea, or did it come from somewhere else?
Yes, thank you for this question, because this is of course very important. The reason why in Flanders at that time the Minister of Energy was aware of the fact that in 1999 the first European directive on the liberalized market was published, and every country needed to have a free electricity and gas market by the 1st of January 2007. In Flanders, they started already in July 2003, and the Minister of Energy, the Flanders Minister of Energy, because we have 4 ministers of energy, a federal one and 3 regional ones, but the Flanders Minister of Energy, I think he was aware of the fact that the free market would have a growing impact on the prices. And he was right, because a study a few years ago from the federal regulator shows that from 2007 till 10 years later, there was the electricity price was raised with 62%. That was double of inflation. The prices were growing with 31% due to inflation, what's normal, but on a Belgian level, the prices raised with 62% electricity prices. So it was really the awareness of the fact that free market doesn't not necessarily means lower prices. It's not only due to the suppliers, because for instance the electricity bill in Belgium is 1/3 energy commodity. Really the price that is invoiced by the suppliers, and 2/3 of the bill is due to distribution tariffs, transport tariffs, and also lots of taxes and levies. For instance, 21% VAT, like I explained it already, it was 6% in 2014 till September 2015. But that has also an enormous impact, of course, on the electricity bill. But it's clear that nevertheless, it's due to suppliers or to other actors, distribution system operators, transport system operators, or the government itself by levies and taxes. The energy, especially the electricity bill, is very high, especially in Flanders. It's well known when we are looking at the ranking at European level. You have first Germany, and then you have Flanders. Normally, it varies a little bit every year or every quarter of a year, but we have very high electricity bills, and that's one of the main challenges for governments, because Europe is saying we want a decarbonized society, so everybody is receiving incentives to go on electricity via EVs and via heat pumps and so on. But the prices are very high, and on the other hand, you have the fossil fuels and the energy through fossil fuels who are and the bill for these products is not so high than for electricity, and that's really a challenge for all the governments, the regional government and also the federal governments. And there are a lot of ways to tackle that, but there is not an easy way to tackle that. That's also a conclusion. Thank you.
So I really want to thank everybody as the panelists for their great insights. I think it will be excellent input for the discussion part of our session that we are going to enter into now. The plan is that I will give a short introduction of how we will do this with this app called Miro, and I will actually share the link in the chat so you can all access it. Although I need to send it in the open chat. Oh, wait, yes. There it is. Not just to Marie. So the idea is that we will have a breakout session whereby you are put into small groups discussing 2 questions that we designed for you on the board. And I will explain to you in a minute how this works and where you need to be. But before I do that, I actually want to also say that if there is still anybody watching just via the live stream, it is possible to join us in this Blackboard or in this big blue button room and join us for this exercise. So if you are still watching just on live stream, but you're not inside this room, please come and join us so you can participate, and you can access that via the website. And for everybody who is already in this room, you can normally enter the room by making a choice, either to join with your microphone or to join just by listening with your headset. And we can see based on your icons in the participants list that some of you have joined only with your headsets, or let's say only to listen, which for now was fine. But we would really like to ask you that after you return to your to the main room, and maybe also when you go into the breakout rooms, that you are able to actually speak. So then it's important that your microphone is enabled, so not just for listening, but that you actually that you participate with your microphone. If you had not selected this, it is possible to come back in this room. People, I think. So I think that means we will have about 8 groups of about 5 people. And the idea is that each of the groups will have 1 question to discuss. So we will ask you in a minute to make known your preference to discuss either question 1 or question 2. And these questions are, and you can see it here. How can we define a minimum base or minimum band of energy? What are people's basic energy needs? And what would be relevant principles or methods to keep into account for trying to define such a thing, if it is something that we want to define in order to make maybe free energy policies or affordable energy policies work or work better? So this is more about, let's say, the definition side of it. Can we really define this minimum content? And I guess mostly focused on the European context. Yesterday we entered into interesting debates about universal minimum band, but these would be questions that could come up in group 1, or let's say question 1, and I think that will be groups 1, 2, 3, 4 in the end. Then there is the question of how to make that work, which we called who pays what. These are themes that we already saw coming up in the presentations. And then we ask you, how should this be done? And do we have any best practice examples or innovative ideas of policies already existing or maybe new ones that we could use to implement this right to free or affordable energy? So this is where we would like to talk about implementation. So with that, I think, or I hope that the setup is clear. If not, feel free to ask a question in the chat. And the idea is now that I think the tech team can open up a different slide, which allows you to put your cursor under one of the 2 questions that we posed. And then we will take your preference and use that to put you into breakout rooms. This has to be done manually, so it will take maybe a few minutes. I hope it will be quick. But once you put your mouse on the right question, the tech team will put you in the right team, and you can essentially take a short break before we start the discussions. Once you are in your breakout room, you have about 15 minutes for your discussion, so it's not extremely long, but we would propose a short round of introductions and then a joint brainstorming. The idea is that we would love every group to record their discussions on the board, so please use the post-its to put down what you think are important aspects. Is this clear? Are there any questions?
We are trying to read all the interesting stuff that you've been writing, but as you can imagine, it's a little bit messy. And yeah, if you hear some background noise, it's my 9-month-old baby who's a little bit hungry. So I think we will have to wrap up by 6 sharp. But for the rest of you, don't forget that there is a bar that you can go to. Yeah, it's not for our parents, unfortunately. But yeah, I'm sure that you will be able to continue with the discussion later, and you will have a lot of fun. So I'm going to the microphone and leave Marlies with the question 1. And Marlies, good luck.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so it was not such a long time that you were in the breakout rooms, but we did see some very interesting things emerging. So what I will do is I will actually share the Miro board so we can have a look at the screen together. But we will also have, of course, our excellent graphic recorder, Louisa, making drawings of this. And you have already seen some of this as we went along. But she's also making a drawing of our final findings. So let me go to the Miro board and see what has been going on there. Good. Let me close the timer. And starting with question 1, and by the way, we've noticed that when we made the switch to the breakout rooms, not all 40 of us remained for the exercise. So it could well be that some of you were only with the 2 of you, but we hope that meant that you had an extra intensive discussion. So the idea is Marine and I will give a sort of get a brief impression from the board, but then we would also love to invite the people that worked on the boards to actually share their impressions from their groups and some of the main discussions that we had. So if I look at board 1, let's say question 1, then there are a number of different interesting things happening here in this area on the left, where we are just talking about a minimum amount of energy needed, whereby apparently there is a distinction made between thermal energy for thermal comfort, I guess, which depends not only on the energy source, but also depends on the house or the climatic zone. And then the other element would be electricity. At the top, I think we can see some things about how should we define this. So we have to think about what people's needs are. We need to listen to testimonies to actually maybe talk to people, but also think about intersectionality of users. So different people needing different things, but also one woman is not the same as another woman maybe. So it depends on maybe also the intersectionality of people's backgrounds. So that's about the individual, taking them into account. Same for the other one, which refers to questions of disability, childcare, elderly. So this really refers to looking at the individual, which I think fits in with your rights perspective also very, very well. Then finally here at the bottom we see some meta ones. So there we go through physical gas meters, which could be extremely related for how people use energy. And then at the bottom, it's very good to see that there is also a remark on the environmental conditions for a minimum. So should we also think about the CO2 that we use when we consume energy, and should that be included in how we define what is minimum or what is necessary or maximum? Because I know that you probably don't have had time to put all the things that you discussed onto the post-its, I would love to see in the chat or via the microphone if there are any things from the groups left that you would want to share. And maybe this we can also record on the graphic recording. So is there anybody from the groups that worked on question 1 that would want to share something? And feel free to open up your microphone and just start talking. Or to type in the chat, either way is possible. I didn't keep track of who was in which group, so unfortunately I cannot make a direct invitation.
Okay,
one
so
of the things, maybe one of the things I can say that I found striking, and I think that is very interesting, but also very difficult, is this idea of wanting to have a certain minimum, but also wanting to be aware of different households' needs and different personal needs. And this was something I think that was not so much there in the Belgian energy policy that we just discussed. It was more based on a family member, I think, but not necessarily so much on whether or not a particular family member may need more or less because they are more at home or less at home or have a disability or have some other type of health need. So how would you account for these things? Is it possible to make differentiations in this respect? And then we know that in many other countries there are different categories of vulnerable customers, and how are they defined? And could that play a role in these types of schemes? Should that play a role in these types of schemes? Was there any group that made a specific discussion on this? So how would you be able to make policy so specific that it applies to specific persons? I think that would be a very interesting question.
Marlies.
Yeah.
Eric Houtman. Yeah. I don't know if anybody wants to react, because I didn't take part on question 1, but I would like to add something on the free electricity, because you have the pros and the contras, and you revealed already some pros and contras, I think. But the goal was affordable electricity price, but it was also ecological in that way that who consumes little gets more. If you are only consuming 2,000 kilowatt hours a year, and your benefit is 500 hours for a household with three persons, the benefit is bigger than when you are when you were consuming 20,000 kilowatt hours, for instance. Of course, it was not so free, it was not for free, like I said it already, because it was repayable through the public service obligations. And another thing was that everybody enjoys it, even those people who don't, or those households who don't need really free electricity according to their income. Can have people with that was one of the obstacles, I think, that the 2 other regions in Belgium didn't want introduce the system, because it was free electricity for every household, also households with enough income who really don't need this free electricity. But you can imagine another system where you are fixing maximum prices for an average of consumption a year, and that is limited to the average consumption of a household. For instance, a regulator can fix a maximum price instead of 8 euro commodity price. You can fix 5 euros commodity price. 5 euros because you're taking into account the price of the production, and you are giving a benefit, a profit margin, of course, to the supplier, and you're giving this maximum price limited to an average consumption of, for instance, 3,500 kilowatt hours a year. That's the average consumption in Flanders and in Belgium, I think, for a household. And that will limit it, of course, people who have lots of consumption and who are not aware of their consumption. So this would be something that is really focused and target to the normal households with limited consumption. But it's only an idea that can be an alternative for free electricity, because you can question this on the social and the ecological side, of course. Thank you.
Thanks. I think that's an excellent point. And the question could maybe indeed be is like, if you start to do it on the basis of averages, then whose average do you take? And should you take that on a more minimum side, or should you take that also on a more maximum side? That's sometimes a question that I have. It's maybe good not to go too much on the minimum side, to take in any types of additional needs that people might have. But then also, what is the top level if we want to have attention for environmental concerns as well? Yeah, thanks. I think it's a good moment to go to Maureen as well. And like I said, people have any questions or points that they want to share on the board or even ask for clarification, feel free to drop a Q in the chat, because unfortunately there's no hand raising function on the big blue button. So then we know that you want to make an intervention. Go ahead, Marie.
I see that Catherine has a question, but can we will move that to after my wrapping up of question 2. So question 2 is about who pays for what, and was about sharing some best practice and innovative policies. I saw a lot of observations regarding the different ways of financing the different schemes, and some kind of warnings that actually reflects also on what Eric told us during his presentation. There is also a strong accent put on the different needs of the people and the different composition with also, of course, intersectional characteristics. We can't assume what's behind closed doors, and we have to only acknowledge that households are different. And for instance, a family of 3 maybe only 2 in the weekend, or because for whatever reason, and that single parents may be single parents 1 week and just single person the other week. So I mean, the situations are quite fluid, and we have to, I mean, policies have to acknowledge this kind of realities. Some people also mention that the solution is outside energy markets. It may be linked, if I understand correctly, to heating performance or to the quality of the building. It can also be linked to the information on energy efficiency, and also on simple practice. But overall, it means that we have to get out of the silos and when thinking about those kind of measures, be quite innovative, in a sense that if we get only to the energy sector, maybe it won't be fair, because even if the energy is free, it may not be free for everyone, and that can be extremely challenging. I think the point on carbon tax and redistribution through tax rebates is quite interesting. The carbon tax overall makes us think of the yellow vest crisis and how policy could be really badly designed. So I guess that's it for my part. Maybe putting more emphasis on renewable energies and sources of energy that actually don't pollute, because maybe it's also a parameter that we have to take into account, is how we do all this within the limits of our planet.
Great, and I think there's still Catherine's comments, but it also goes for board 2. So if there is anybody who wants to make a clarification or has a question, like I said, I also seem to notice this very interesting to post it there where one person has said, or one group has said, let's go for means-based testing, another group has said, let's not do that. But let's hear from Catherine. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I've been just thinking about examples from housing policies, because there we have the similar discussions. How affordable housing is the same issue, basically. We're discussing, is it a right to housing that you should have? How much should housing cost? And there's a bit of experimentation, and the one suggestion is that you don't pay a fixed amount like for rent, but you pay as much as you can afford according to your income. So you rather pay a certain share of your income instead of a fixed amount. I don't know whether this is practice anywhere. I believe somewhere in the Nordic countries some experimentation was going on with that, but I'm not so sure. But maybe there's inspiration in this. And another interesting idea I thought was put forward again for heating bills in housing, in rental housing, that the owners only get a certain fixed amount for heating from the tenants, which should encourage the owners to reduce their spending for the fuel for heating, because the more efficient the envelope of the building is, the less the owner would pay. So if they want to make a little plus or reduce the weight of the energy bill, then they should move, not the tenants. But the tenants could still get a reduction if they use less than some average something. So if there is energy savings, then the tenants should profit. And if there is an overspending and bad quality of housing, then the cost burden would be on the landlords and the owners of the building, which I found a very interesting proposal.
Thanks. That is very interesting.
Yeah, there is definitely so much to learn from other schemes. That it would have been wonderful to have somebody who from the water sector, maybe, or the free transportation debate that do exist. I mean, Marlies is the queen of the Marrow board, so she will probably agree that the Marrow board will remain open. So if you have in the middle of the night, you suddenly have a wonderful idea, just feel free to put it on the board.
Yeah, no, exactly. So the Marrow board will indeed stay open. We didn't have a password today, but now that the Marrow board is out in the open, we may put a password at one point, but then it will always be shared via the chat if we are going to use it for later days. But in principle, the Marrow board is open, and every day we will use it in a different way for each of the sessions. So by the end, we have collected all our different thoughts. Like Rachel is also saying in the chat, a lot of things that have come up here today will definitely be part of the discussions as we're going forward. So I don't think this is the last day that we will have discussed free energy or affordable energy or minimum energy, or how to define what is affordable. There are good lessons to learn from other human rights as well, probably, and this is precisely what the session tomorrow on Wednesday is about. So I really hope that everybody will continue with us for the other sessions as well. Are there any other questions still that people want to raise or points that people want to make?
Could we maybe share Louisa's screen?
Yes,
see where it's going. Yeah, let's see where it's going, and if somebody has something really heating up that they want to see in this wrap up that will be produced, and that we will all see. I'm really excited to discover it. Yeah. Yeah.
I think there's always a little bit of delay for.
Okay. Wow. Oh, we are getting somewhere.
I would be very interested, Louisa. I think we have asked you before whether it would be okay to ask you to share some of your impressions, because you have been drawing on this for the last 2 hours. Is there something that you want to explain about the drawing, or that you feel that you could explain?
Wow, I'm not prepared to do, but I will do my best. For me, it's a completely new topic, and I'm really impressed about how big this topic is, and how much you have to be aware of. Especially the intersectionality, I think, is really important. And that you don't miss the individual needs when you try to define something universally. And I think there's still so much to discuss about, and I'm curious for the next days, but I don't have like one key insight. I think it's too complex to bring it on just one point. I'm sorry.
No, I think
as you see my recordings, they are full of important stuff. So, yes.
Yeah. What I can see from it here now, again, I think it sounds like you did a very great job of summarizing some of our discussions in the first panel at the top, and then on the Marrow board at the bottom. I'm not sure if the drawing is already finished, because we also said that, especially with all the lively discussions, it may be there may be some final drawing done before you actually finalize the drawing, and we also put it up onto the website. But thanks for the feedback and for your intervention, knowing that it is difficult, and by the end of this week you are probably an expert that you didn't realize. So maybe this is a good point to wrap up, also knowing that it's 6 o'clock. So you know that we have this bar on the website. So you can go onto the forum website where you will find the bar. Hopefully you have already seen it. What we have done there's a number of different places where you can go to have a chat and to find others to continue the conversation. We have a main bar where I will be both the DJ and the bartender. So there is a sort of general hangout place where it's said join the bar, but there's also a campfire space that you may want to drop into, especially if you just want to see who's there, meet and greet, and to have a small chat. And then we actually have 2 tables reserved where you could try to find people that want to continue some discussions of today on specific topics. So we have one table that is specifically about some further chats about minimum energy services, and I think that's the coffee maker. And then there's the toaster if you think it would be interesting to talk a little bit more about how you would want to organize free energy. So feel free to go to the bar area and explore a little bit. If you go to one of the places and there's nobody there, feel free to come to the main bar because we will always be there until between 6 and 8. So not always, that's a relative idea, but between 6 and 8. We will be there for a chat, and last night we had a very nice conversation as well. So I hope you will join. Thanks for today, also to all the speakers, to Maureen for hosting also the first part, for Audrey for the presentation, and our 3 panelists, Eric, Joana, and Ruth. And I look forward to the coming days.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Marlies. Thanks to you. I've put again the link to the bar, and Rachel is telling us that the right to water will be tackled tomorrow. So please keep on and connect to the Engager Energy Rights Forum website and just explore everything, because it's just the beginning of a very long conversation. So we are really excited to see you on the other side now. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
See you in the bar for a chat. Bye.
Bye.